Welcome all. Welcome to the Human Libraries of Procurement podcast. We call it Human Libraries of Procurement because of the three basic elements: the human connect, the libraries part, which shows the knowledgeable people who are there in procurement, and procurement because we talk about procurement. One such human library of procurement is Wojciech. Wojciech, thank you for doing this. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much, Pratim. First and foremost, much appreciated for the invitation. I'm quite well and very excited to be here.
Right. Wojciech, we'll start with your career. Could you please run us through your career? What did you do and how you landed up in procurement?
As far as my career in procurement is concerned, well, it was a little bit of an university where I was writing a thesis in game theory, which obviously, let's say, has an impact on, let's say, some of the procurement aspects. I landed an internship in training management at Munich, which then kind of turned into a first job as a subcontractor, something I really didn't necessarily appreciate too much, but I decided to still plow through and land a German work permit, which at the time, as a Polish person, I needed. Then, at that time, I was also, let's say, applying for other positions. I went to Procter & Gamble for, let's say, a job fair. And while, let's say, initially I was applying for a sales job, they actually said, well, you know what, with your background, we think you should be going into a facility management procurement there. There was a little bit of a connection with the thing I've done before, but apparently it was enough to basically leave the job. And from there on, basically, I hopped through, let's say, a variety of procurement, but within indirect. So the facilities was the one. Then it was broad marketing procurement. Then I have been given a role within media, and from there on, media has been media is the one that I find most interesting. That's what I, let's say, decided to continue my career and develop it further. The couple of reasons why I think it's so interesting. A, it has lots of money, right? It's a huge spend typically. It has a conflict of interest. It is a very complex and very specific field, and it has huge impact on the overall business. Again, taking into account the volume of money that is spent there. And from my experience, there is an overall gap in terms of skills and priorities when it comes to, let's say, the proper governance. And I think this is something I wanted.
So media, yes, a lot of money is there, and a lot of governance is needed for media, for sure. So that makes it,
absolutely.
Yeah, that makes it nice. We'll move on, Wojciech, with our discussion.
Sure.
A lot of procurement people actually rely a lot on the category knowledge. How is category knowledge important for procurement people?
I think it depends, is probably the best answer to that. I would say the following. On the one hand, and in particular, in marketing procurement, a lot of, let's say, fields within the category are not necessarily rocket science, and you don't necessarily need to be, let's say, so deep in it. But yeah, I mean, if we let's say, kind of look at the knowledge, is it good to have knowledge? Yes, absolutely. And you should try to develop, let's say, the industry specific, or let's say, the category specific knowledge, and should also, let's say, try to get that learning curve as thick and steep as possible. Right? Because it will definitely help you in doing your job well. But at the same time, again, it's going to be difficult to develop your understanding and skill on, let's say, the top-notch level. right? And so from this perspective, I think it's to get to knowledge what you know and understand what you don't know, and also reach out and get some proper help perspective from people who are specializing in this. And I had an interesting exchange recently with one of my clients who was kind of asked by her internal clients about, well, why do you need a media specialist? Why do we hire you for, right? And I thought it was very cheeky of those guys, especially. And again, if you don't know or you don't have certain skills, you just kind of need to be able to bring them from the outside, just like people from marketing do, right? I mean, again, they don't have lots of agencies, both in, let's say, the creative, in PR, in communications, and in media, right? And nobody's asking them the questions like, well, why don't you do this all by yourself, right? So from this perspective, again, kind of to wrap it up, yes, it's absolutely good and important to have, let's say, a deep knowledge within the category. It will definitely help you, but it's something that you can have across all of the possible.
Right.
Yeah.
If procurement knew everything, we would be the stakeholders, not the other way around.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and marketing category is known for this. That marketing category uses this knowledge gap as an excuse for not engaging procurement. So, do you think this can be improved, and what measures can procurement do to improve this?
Well, again, I think it has to do obviously with, let's say, a learning curve that you're going to be on. We are there to basically be the wingman for the marketing team. So we need to learn, listen, and try to understand, let's say, the problems. Some of those, basically, they're the ones who create, right? We also need to acknowledge this every now and then. But with this, with the engagement, with learning the language, right, the specifics of that, and trying to demonstrate and prove our value, this is how you earn the seat at the table and eventually, let's say, the problems. Some of those, basically, they're the ones who create, right? We also need to acknowledge this every now and then. But with this, with the engagement, with learning the language, right, the specifics of that, and trying to demonstrate and prove our value, this is how you earn the seat at the table and eventually become a value partner rather than somebody who's just a nuisance and disturbance.
Right. Before I move on with the other questions, I have a question in the chat from Richard. He says, how does marketing determine its budget, and how does media procurement manage spending?
Oh, that's a very tough question. Right. Because how does marketing determine its budget? Well, it depends on how much money it's available, right? How well the business is going, and how much finance decides to allocate to marketing. And the other part of the question was related to you, right? Sorry, what was the other part?
It's about media procurement. How does media procurement manage spending?
Again, I think here the key point about, let's say, management of the spend is to ensure that you have the right volumes, right? That you're meeting certain media best. That's what let's say the media planning and tracking against that media planning is about. There's a certain strategy that needs to be put in place for, let's say, a year, right, with specific allocations to different media vendors, right? When you say, okay, how much of TV do I need, right? How much should I dedicate to digital? Do I need press? Yes or no? Maybe I need out of home as well, right? And based upon that, you also allocate spend to specific media owners, and you negotiate either, let's say, directly or with the help of the agencies, which you can basically then construct certain should cost and basically work based on
Right.
that.
I'll just add one point here about the budget that is there. So as per what I know from the company structure, the second last department to get any budget is marketing, and the last one to get any budget is actually procurement. So procurement is after marketing that we get budget. Practically, we don't get any budget for training or anything.
That is quite a common complaint. However, I think it also depends. There are companies that are very marketing driven, and then obviously, let's say their marketing spend is going to be huge, right? There are companies that are far more like production or tech focused, and they don't care that much about marketing. And then I would say, let's say the side is far more likely to be happening there. Now, the point I actually kind of failed to mention in the previous, let's say, question about management of the budgets, specifically in media. One of the trends that I have seen is that, if marketing gets XYZ amount of money, they will want to spend it all, right? And in media, well, I think in general, in life, media is a very, let's say, good example of that. There's a certain point where, let's say, the more of media you put, the less output you're getting. And so from this perspective, I'm a big proponent of basically spending to certain target. This is why you're putting strategies. This is why you're putting specific media plans and media objectives. Once those objectives are met, right? Well, this is the kind of point where you should consider, okay, is it still making sense to continue spending and get some of the incrementals while likely, let's say, they're going to be more expensive on a, let's say, per unit basis? Or this is a time that we stop and we actually take the money and do something else with it, right? For which we, for example, didn't have the budget for.
Right. I think those are fair points. Yes. We'll continue with marketing category because that's what we're here to talk about.
Sure.
How do you see marketing category, let's say, different from other categories? How is marketing procurement different from other categories procurement?
There's quite a few, let's say, differentiators, and I think I'll compare this specifically with let's say more of a direct spend, right? Because this is where you see the differences the most, right? So first and foremost, this is a far broader category. When you talk to, let's say, people in direct spend, right? They don't have a very narrow, we're talking, I don't know, crude oil buyers, right? Or somebody who's ordering specific parts for specific whatever, right?
Chemicals.
Or whatever it is going to be, let's say, relatively narrow. It is going to be very specific, typically with a very well-defined specification that you then go out and buy, and you can compare it on an apple-to-apple basis in a relatively easy way, right? That's not necessarily the case in indirect, specifically, let's say, within marketing. That's there's going to be quite a spectrum of different specifications. You can buy a leaflet, right? It's the thickness of the paper, whether or not you use MYK coloring or something more custom, and so on and so forth. There's tons of things that will differentiate, let's say, the perceived quality, but also the cost structure. Another thing, and this is also something that people sometimes fail to acknowledge, but it's this is the way it works, right? Marketing procurement doesn't solve the business. It's not a business essential category,
Right.
at least in the short run,
Yeah.
right? If you're off air media for a week, some people may notice, but in the grand scheme of things, the business will continue to be sold, right? And I think this is also something that I always try to help the marketing guys realize, that this is not the end of the world. Why? Absolutely, it is going to be some sort of a disruption. It's not business critical. What else? Yeah, I think the stakeholders again are also, let's say, quite different. If you think about, let's say, the environment, right? The primary objective of people and engineers in the plant is to make sure that, let's say, the plant continues to generate output, and that it's doing it as effectively and efficiently as possible. While in marketing, the interests are somewhat different at times, and it is about making sure that sometimes you retain your budget, right? It's also, let's say, a priority,
Right.
which also leads to, let's say, some of the discussions that might be facing when, let's say, having the marketing and the procurement discussions.
Right. For me, I personally love the creative aspects of marketing, and
Sure.
the best part for me is that I can see the results. I would see a hoarding somewhere or a billboard somewhere, and I would see that, okay, this is something that I'm part of, and that excites me a lot. So
Yeah, sure.
that's another way of seeing it.
I mean,
But I think what
look,
you covered is very nice. Yeah.
I also think it's, in a sense, marketing is quite exciting, right? I mean,
Right.
you get to see, let's say, the output, right, in TV and digital, the billboard. When
Right.
you also, let's say, negotiate an agreement with a celebrity, right, and then to see that celebrity in the creative.
Yes. And I just wanted to go on further on that question. I wanted to check with you, like, what values can procurement get in marketing category? Like, why would why is procurement needed? Because this is a question that stakeholders have all the time.
Look,
What values can procurement?
yeah, and I think in general, let's say, people in procurement should also learn a little bit from marketing and try
Right.
to sell, let's say, their knowledge and their expertise and their input a little better. And I think it revolves around a couple of things. So the captain obvious is the cost reduction. You can generate, a better ROI on whatever you're doing in
Right.
marketing, right? And I think also it's an interesting kind of perspective when, when you compare, let's say, the input from sales versus the input from procurement, right? Getting a new client and selling, I don't know, 100 SKUs of XYZ would contribute to that profitability, right? But it's actually going to be not as impactful as, let's say, a 5% reduction on, let's say, the entire marketing media spend, right?
Right.
And so from this perspective, I think we also need to acknowledge that I think that's a small reduction in cost is and sometimes sometimes it's actually generating a very significant improvement to profitability of the company. The other thing that I saw that actually we can drive a lot of value in is to help the clients to define, let's say, the scope and the specification of what they want, right? Because at least that has been my experience at times. I had clients who come, they have a vague idea of what they want, or what
Right.
type of outcome do they want to get, right?
Right.
And we can definitely help them to narrow it and talk about, let's say, the cost to quality trade-offs, and probably something that then you later on buy and implement, and again get that top ROI, right? And it comes to the and mitigation of those, right? We're the ones for the NDAs. We're the ones who ensure there's compliance, right? That's, let's say, suppliers are not ripping us off, and they're not, you know, saying that they have shipped, well, it hasn't been received, and so on and so forth, right? So the cost and quality, and let's say any type of overall system of business, bringing outside in, right? The innovation is also a major thing. We're the ones who talk to, let's say, the suppliers who are, let's say, spearheading the because we're connected to the outside world. There's some benchmarking that we can bring that helps us to reassess the validity of our business and bring some improvements here.
Right. I have a question there in the chat from Richard.
Yeah.
But that is regarding media. We will get to media suppliers as well. I wanted to continue with marketing category for a little longer,
Okay.
specifically for the subcategory agencies. So ad agencies, there is something called agency family tree. Would you like to explain what is the agency family tree and how it controls marketing?
Well, basically, if we want to talk about, let's say, the agency tree, in plain and simple terms, the agencies group themselves, let's say, to provide the broad spectrum of the services within marketing, right? From the creative to production, all the way to, let's say, media planning, and let's say any type of supporting services on our side. I think traditionally this has been very much integrated, right? So every agency was doing this, let's say, as a full service. Then it has somehow evolved. There were specialization within that, and the agencies basically, while, let's say, they have their specialties, they have grouped themselves, let's say, under the holding companies, and there are, let's say, some usual suspects out there, and they basically control, let's say, the entire supply chain within that. And sometimes people don't realize how much business they are actually doing with a company on a whole company, right, through, let's say, various aspects of marketing.
Right. And there was a post in LinkedIn that you mentioned that there are some changes in the agency family holding companies.
Correct.
They're going through some changes. Could you please tell us as to what changes we can expect and how it will affect the overall scheme of things?
Right. So the latest in the industry. I think I need to take a step back. Obviously, quite a lot of changes overall. Let's say within the field, there's constantly, let's say, new agencies popping up and new services being developed. But in general, within the industry, as I mentioned, some usual suspects as far as the holding companies are concerned. And one of the major events of the, let's say, end of last year, beginning this one, is the potential consolidation. I think has already been, let's say, to some extent, between IPG and Omnicom, right? Yeah. And that is obviously going to be a major shift, because we'll put the combined business at the forefront of, let's say, the overall industry. It will obviously hold, let's say, significant negotiation power with, let's say, the media owners, or more so than you, let's say, as two separate ones. But I think also it has say, some implications to the client, right? I mean, at the end of the day, as I mentioned, there's only a handful of, let's say, those holding companies out there. And now there's going to be one less, right? Which means that as far as the choice is concerned, it's going to be somewhat limited. I think the reason why those holding companies are emerging is, again, to kind of seek those efficiencies and improve their clouds, which kind of, you know, it has been already, let's say, kind of a oligopoly, and now it concentrates even more. So from this perspective, this is something that the advertisers should be aware of, keeping an eye on, and yeah, trying to, let's say, mitigate the potential negative effects that it may have on them.
Right. Thank you for that. We'll go into media buying now. So how is now media buying different, or what components of media buying are there, and what comes to your mind when talking about media buying, let's say?
Yeah, when I went to media buying from my facilities and, let's say, the broader marketing experience, the very first thing that struck me is that it's so vague, right? When you work in, let's say, the more specific, I don't know, you buy leaflets, right? Or you buy catering or cleaning services, right? Everything is super quantifiable. You can say, okay, look, this is how much, let's say, the fuel cost, this is the hourly wage, this is the chemicals, All the shoot cost calculation can be very, very specific, right?
Right.
In media, that's not the case, right? It is far more blurry. The cost structure of the media owners is oftentimes difficult to kind of have a get into, especially when there's so many of them. It's also due to the fact that the agencies also play a very significant role within, let's say, that environment. In general, if you also talk about differences, for me, media is a little bit of a counterintuitive. Your campaign is not necessarily the best one. So from this perspective, I think when you think about the media category here, as proverb says, the success is many fathers, and if, let's say, there's good sales, everybody in his soul,
right,
I did it, right? It was me. Thank you. But the failure is an orphan, and there's always some sort of explanation. No, he did everything well in media, but it was raining on that day, and because of that, people didn't watch TV or whatever else.
Right. Yeah.
And I think also from this perspective, there's some differences in terms of standards of quality, and this price to quality show is also, let's say, a bit more difficult to point versus, let's say, something that is more tangible. I did mention that before. The agencies have an inherent conflict of interest, right? They are oftentimes acting as a wholesaler who has an interest in selling particular type of media, which may not necessarily be the one that you actually would be buying if it was up to you or in your best interest. I think that also makes it quite difficult. Something that you do and try to combat, actually. And then finally, enormous, right? Media has so many media types, media suppliers, things that influence that, that it takes quite a lot of knowledge and understanding to be able to operate within that.
Right.
Yep.
Right. I think, yeah, I think that gets me to the next question that I have. That, if that is the case, then you need a lot of media governance. You need a lot of
Yes.
governance to be there for the buying. Uh, tell us how can companies benefit from media governance? Something like a success story that you have encountered, or something like that.
Well, I mean, yeah, we can talk about the, let's say, success stories, but I think from an, let's say, a very generic point of view, right? If you think about how much money is being spent on media, the
Right.
fact that there's many ways to deliver this, if you add on top of that the conflict of interest that I just mentioned that the agencies have, um,
Right.
considering this spend as investment, um, media governance, regardless of the, let's say, amount of spend, is something that the advertisers need to engage in, and because again, it's about protecting the interests of the company, right, and making sure that you get the ROI that you're expecting from it. Now, is media governance, a very sexy thing to do? No, it's not, right? Because it takes a lot of details. It's a lot of minutiae, so to speak. And I think the marketing guys, they have bigger fish to fry. They have, let's say, other priorities. Media governance is considered a chore rather than, let's say, something that you get medals for, right? And I think people fail to realize how absolutely crucial it is to get the proper media governance in place to ensure that you get this right value from your investment. And I think, in particular, right, the role of procurement in this is very often, let's say, underestimated. Uh,
Right.
partially partially because of this knowledge that we talked about, right? There aren't that many media procurement people I have come across who have an absolute expert knowledge in the field, right? Some know more, some know less, that you really need to understand well, right? And as in any type of, let's say, business environment, your contract, getting the contract right is the absolute minimum
Right.
for you to be able to get the value. If you screw up the contract, you're in trouble, right?
Right.
However,
Yeah.
in media, this is just the beginning, right?
Right.
Getting the right contract is bare minimum. Then you need to ensure, and you need to have processes in place to ensure that this value of the contract and what you have negotiated and so on and so forth is actually being realized. And I think one of those things that people also need to kind of acknowledge and understand is that, if you do a media pitch, you are in, let's say, a good competitive position to get the good contract, get the conditions that you want, and so on and so forth. Once you have allocated this, actually the power pendulum swings more towards the agency,
Right.
because you're already in the business, and changing the agency in the middle of the process is quite disturbing. People don't like it. It's a disturbance to the business. So the agency can get away with more.
I think we are at the right moment now to take Richard's question. So
Sure.
Richard asked some time back, what factors do procurement team consider when selecting media suppliers? So what are the criteria that you look into supplier selection?
Most of, let's say, the advertisers will deal with, predominantly at least, with media agencies, right? That's the nature of the beast. Obviously, there's, let's say, a tendency to, let's say, take some of them in-house. But in general, it is still a largely agency-driven industry. And I think here there are different aspects, also depending on the, let's say, the countries or regions that we're talking about. Agency clout in the marketplace will take, let's say, a role. If you're working with a niche agency, it's going to be a different impact, and let's say different components versus, let's say, working with the biggest, baddest kid on the block, right? At the same time, you should definitely look specifically on the type of you're going to be serviced with. It's still a very much people's business. The agencies are, let's say, investing a lot into tech and among all the AI solutions and whatnot. But from my experience so far, let's say the quality of the team that is servicing you is playing a major role. Obviously, there are commercial conditions to take into account. So who's actually promising you better media conditions? And again, when we talk about this conflict of interest, thinking back about, let's say, media governance and why this is necessary, right? You show the agencies that you are actually, if you show your interest and you are showing, let's say, how particularly you are about your media, well, that will give you more attention, and most likely will give you also better conditions, right? Those who don't care, well, if they don't care and they're not interested, well, then we'll serve them whatever we feel best, right? And when we talk about, let's say, media owners specifically, well, that's more to do with, what's their impact, what's their target audience that they cater to, and whether or not this audience aligns with the ones we want to talk to, right? So if you're selling bicycles, right, maybe the audience that is interested in fishing may not necessarily be the one that you're after, even though I'm quite sure there will be some biking fishers, right? Fishermen or whatever, right? But we see the assignment plays a role, and then the second factor within that, once you have the pool of suppliers who can deliver or cater to the audience that you want to reach, it's how effective and efficient they can be.
One further question on media and marketing. What do you see as a future for marketing or media buying? We already have digital, we already have social media influencers. What other future do you think we will be heading to?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about, let's say, the media delivery, right? So how people consume media. I mean, who's to know that, right? I mean, obviously, let's say the industry, some of the industries betting on augmented or, let's say, virtual reality. Broad general gaming and entertainment is something that, let's say, people tend to spend a lot of time on. And as long as there's going to be space to, let's say, push some sort of marketing message through, that's definitely going to be exploited. Now, at the same time, and when we're talking about, let's say, the planning and buying, given its complexity, I would say that the development of AI is definitely going to be playing a major role. It also carries a certain risk, because AI models are probably going to be owned by the media agencies, or maybe let's say the big players such as Meta, or let's say Alphabet or Google, right? And this is where it becomes again a question of whose best interest will those AI agents be working for, right? Is this going to be the best thing for the advertiser, or it's actually first going to be the best thing for whoever agency or media owner, and then within that premise being met, let's say there's going to be a second interest of the client taken into account, which leads to let's say believe that again this is actually going to be an even more important aspect pushing the need for media governance and the strength of it, right? Not to get fed pork pies because somebody says, well, this is what our computer is telling us that we're doing, right? So there still needs to be some sort of common sense. And if you think about it, media isn't rocket science. It's let's say grand scheme of things, right? It's about talking to the right people, being able to capture their attention. That's what
I have a follow-up question from Richard. How do you see AI affecting pricing in marketing and media? So you touched it a little bit, but how do you see AI affecting pricing?
right. Again, we need to kind of distinguish here between, let's say, affecting the cost service, right? Because again, if things, let's say, develop at this pace and let's say this quality as it has been in the past, let's say, a year or two, the client likely demand lower agencies, right? Because let's say the number of FTs is going, there's going to be a lot of outsourced work towards, let's say, the algorithms.
Right.
I think it's going to get more competitive because, right now, I think as far as cost is concerned, it's a game of skill, right? Negotiations combined with, let's say, some optimizations and so on and so forth. If this is going to go more towards algorithms, let's say, doing that, and everybody having, let's say, similar quality of the algorithms, I think the levels will kind of be reached where things are a little bit more similar.
Negotiation. Any tips on how you negotiate, or for buyers, what they can keep in mind when they're negotiating?
I think it's a very broad, let's say, statements. First and foremost, you need to really understand what you want to achieve, right? Understand what are your options, and in particular in media, as I mentioned, that, so to speak, right? So obviously having that, let's say, choice is a good thing. You need to understand, let's say, the levers that you have, and in particular when we talk about, let's say, the media pitches, they have a certain dynamic and a timeline. And within that timeline, your power may increase or decrease. And it's very important to keep an eye on which stage of those negotiations you are in. If you're not already past, let's say, where your power is strong. So yeah, keep it like that. But also, one of the aspects I keep talking to what they want to listen is, and again, thinking about, let's say, my game theory background, right? From the university. Most of the, the negotiations, if you're in this industry, is going to be, let's say, better games, right? And you need to keep that in mind, meaning that, striking an awesome deal that somebody is going to be, let's say, regretful about the other side, right? Is probably not the best long-term strategy. So while obviously, I'm a big, I'm say the conflict of interest that the agencies are having and so on and so forth, I would acknowledge their rightful place in this industry. I would hope it would be, let's say, somewhat differently organized, but well, that's a different topic. But what I'm saying is, those agencies play an important role in the industry, whether I like it or not. and they have to be successful to a certain extent, right? And whenever, let's say, we do business with them, they need to pay their people. They need to be also profitable. Now, it shouldn't be expense, right? Or let's say it shouldn't be shady. But we need to acknowledge that there are also guys who need to earn their living, and squeezing them just for the sake of squeezing and getting, let's say, the best deal might be short-sighted, because you will end up with an unhappy agency that will probably intensify some of the tricks that they will have in their portfolio, and you'll end up looking for a new agency shortly afterwards, and this is not going to be good for the business.
Right. Yeah, there's one saying that says, don't make all the money in the deal, because if you do so, you will not get many deals. So that's a very good advice. Thank you for that. I have another question from Richard. Again, this can be a little layered. He says, are contracts awarded on fixed price, cost plus, or hourly rates, or time and material? So, fixed price.
I think the shortest answer to that is yes. How do you approach media, right? If you're a multi, $1 million business with lots of brands who are active in media year in and year out, I would go for a fixed fee, which is kind of a cost plus model.
Right.
If you're not that stable in terms of the spending, and it fluctuates also year over year and so on and so forth, commission is most likely what you're going to end up with.
If there is any fresher listening to this podcast, what message do you want to give it to him about procurement career? Like, why should he consider procurement as a career?
Because it's fun. I think it's fun. I mean, obviously there are different aspects of it. I enjoy immensely, let's say, the negotiations part and strategizing. I think this is let's say, in general, a role that gives people a very broad picture of the entire business, right? If you're in procurement and you do, let's say, and you develop your career within that field, you see all kinds of aspects of business. And again, the connection between the outside and the inside is great. I think also another thing that I cherish a lot is the fact that you're the guardian of the business, right? So you make sure that, let's say, the business is not heading into trouble.
Right.
There's a stewardship component in that, which basically puts us in the life side of the force, right? And it's a good feeling. I think that's also something.
I think that's a very good note. I think that would prompt some people at least to choose procurement. I think the fun part was the best part to start with.
And I think this is also one aspect that I didn't really touch upon in let's say, the previous minutes. You can buy cheap media. Anybody can buy cheap media, but that doesn't mean that this is the right thing to do, because they may not necessarily be very effective, right? And from this perspective, there's a cost component that needs to be taken into account, but at the same time, right, it's not a separate thing. It needs to be linked. Then
we are on time now, so I'll stop here. Wojciech, thank you so much for doing this. It's always a pleasure talking to you. A lot of knowledge there. I hope it helps a lot of people here. It's always good to learn, because there is not many good marketing buyers, and you are one of the best marketing and media buyers that I know. So it's a rare thing to know about these things. Thank you for sharing the knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. First and foremost, thank you very much for having me here. It's been a real pleasure to have this session. I'm very talkative about this, and I hope you guys can see, let's say, passion and engagement when it comes to media. If you have, let's say, more specific questions or let's say things that you need some help with, feel free to reach out, and I'll try to again and give you some tips and maybe help.
Right. So I say this to all my guests. I'll say this to you as well. We can have a second round anytime that you want.
I'm happy to jump on a call again.
Right. Thank you again, Wojciech. Nice talking to you. Have a nice day.
Pleasure is mine. Bye.
Bye-bye.